bank manager slid my papers across the polished mahogany desk like they were contaminated. His eyes never met mine as he spoke. "We don't fund people like you." The words hit me like a physical blow. I sat there, frozen, watching his mouth form a smirk that would haunt my dreams for months. "Small dreams, small risks," he added, leaning back in his leather chair. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, filling the silence with their cruel buzz. My hands trembled as I gathered the scattered documents. Other customers in the lobby turned to stare as I walked out. The rejection letter felt heavy in my pocket, each word burning through the paper into my skin. Rain poured down outside, soaking through my only good shirt within seconds. I stood on the sidewalk, watching the water blur the ink on my dreams. Through the downpour, I spotted an old man struggling beside a broken-down sedan. His weathered hands pushed against the hood while rain streamed down his face. Every instinct told me to keep walking, to nurse my wounded pride in private, but something deeper pulled me forward. I approached without speaking and planted my hands beside his on the wet metal. Together, we pushed the car toward the curb. The old man popped the hood, and I spotted the problem immediately. A loose battery cable dangled uselessly. Tightened it with my bare hands, and the engine roared to life moments later. The old man smiled, water dripping from his gray beard. "You fix things, don't you, even when they're not yours?" His voice carried a strange weight, like he knew secrets I didn't. He drove away slowly, his eyes finding mine in the rearview mirror. "My name is Kingsley, and that rejection wasn't my first taste of failure. 3 months earlier, I'd stood in my cramped garage with blueprints spread across an oil-stained workbench. The concrete floor had more cracks than solid sections. Rusted tools hung on bent nails along the walls. But in my mind, I saw something beautiful. King's Auto Repair, I'd named it, though it was barely more than a glorified shed. I'd been saving money for 6 years, working double shifts at the factory while fixing neighbors' cars on weekends. My dream was simple but powerful. I wanted to build a proper workshop where I could hire local teenagers, kids who needed direction and opportunity. The community needed honest mechanics. I needed to prove I was more than my circumstances. The bank was supposed to be my partner in making it real. When I first met the bank manager, he'd seemed almost kind. His handshake was firm, his smile practiced but warm enough. "Ambitious for a small guy," he'd said, flipping through my proposal. I'd shown him everything. Detailed financial projections, letters from community members promising their business, proof of my growing reputation for honest work. He'd nodded thoughtfully, making small encouraging sounds. "Let me review this properly," he'd promised. "We might find a way to help you." I'd left. That meeting walking on air. The subway ride home felt like floating. I'd believed the system worked for people who worked hard and dreamed honestly. I'd called my mother that night, voice shaking with hope. She'd cried happy tears and said prayers of thanksgiving. I was wrong about everything. 2 weeks later, I returned to the bank wearing my best shirt, the one I saved for funerals and job interviews. I'd updated my proposal based on his suggestions, adding more details and better projections. The receptionist made me wait 40 minutes in the lobby. When I finally entered his office, he didn't even glance at my documents. "Too small scale," he announced, examining his manicured fingernails. "Too local." I tried explaining that local was exactly the point, that communities needed businesses invested in their success, not distant corporations. He waved his hand dismissively. "Dreams are safer as hobbies, Kingsley." His voice dripped with condescension. As I walked out, shoulders slumped and heart heavy, I noticed the same old man from the rain. He sat on a bench outside the bank, watching me with knowing eyes. That evening, I found a worn leather wallet on the sidewalk near that bench. Inside was the old man's identification card and $60 in cash. I could have kept it. Nobody would have known. Instead, I spent an hour tracking down his address across town. He lived in a modest apartment building with peeling paint and broken mailboxes. When I knocked on his door, surprise crossed his weathered face. "You came all this way?" he asked, taking the wallet carefully. "Most people would have kept it." He insisted on buying me dinner despite my protests. We ended up at a roadside diner with cracked vinyl seats and flickering neon signs. Over cheap burgers and watery coffee, he said something that lodged in my chest. "Keep fixing things, son. You never know who's watching." I refused to give up completely. I found a small investor through a friend of a cousin. He agreed to put up $5,000 if the bank would match it with a loan. It wasn't much, but it was enough to get started properly. I walked back into that bank with renewed confidence. My proposal was stronger now, backed by actual investment capital. The manager barely looked up from his computer when I entered. "Didn't you get the hint?" he asked coldly. Then right there in the open lobby where other customers could hear, he rejected me again. Loudly, publicly. My throat closed up, choking on humiliation. As I turned to leave, vision blurred with unshed tears, I caught sight of the old man again. He stood in line for a teller, watching the entire scene unfold with eyes that held something like disappointment. That night broke something in me. I sat on my apartment floor surrounded by crumpled papers and shattered dreams. The rejection letters lay scattered like autumn leaves. My savings account was nearly empty after all the proposal revisions and new business cards, but the old man's words kept echoing through my despair. "Failure's not final if your heart's still kind." I didn't fully understand what he meant. Kindness seemed like a luxury I couldn't afford when survival demanded ruthlessness, but I made a decision anyway. I would build something with my bare hands and borrowed tools. I would prove that dreams didn't need bank approval to become real. I set up my first real workshop behind my apartment building. The space had a leaking roof and flickering fluorescent lights, but the rent was affordable. I started fixing cars for neighbors at prices they could afford. No fancy equipment, just determination and skill. Some nights I worked past midnight, my hands cramped and back aching. Word spread slowly through the community. People appreciated my honesty in a world full of mechanics who invented problems to inflate bills. My little workshop became a gathering place for folks who'd been cheated by bigger shops. They brought their cars and their stories. One afternoon, the old man appeared carrying 2 sandwiches wrapped in brown paper. He didn't explain how he found me or why he came. He just sat on an overturned bucket beside my workbench and ate his sandwich in comfortable silence. When he finished, he handed me the second sandwich without a word. I was too hungry to refuse. The old man started visiting regularly. We'd share simple lunches while I worked. He never complained about the uncomfortable seating or the oil stains. He asked strange questions that seemed unrelated to auto repair. "If someone gave you $1 million tomorrow, what's the first thing you'd build?" I laughed at the absurdity. "I'd fix every broken car in the city first," I answered honestly. "People depend on their vehicles to get to work, to feed their families." He smiled faintly and wrote something in a small leather notebook he always carried. I didn't think much of it then. His questions seemed like the philosophical musings of an old man with time to spare. Sometimes he'd watch me work for hours without speaking. His presence became oddly comforting, like having a grandfather I'd never known. My friend Marcus pulled me aside one evening after the old man left. "You trust that guy too much," he warned. "He's probably scouting you for something shady." I brushed off his concerns. The old man had never asked for anything or suggested anything illegal. He just seemed lonely and interested in my work. One evening, he returned with a car I'd repaired the previous week, a simple brake job that I'd charged $40 for. He handed me $80 in crisp bills. "You undercharge for quality," he stated matter-of-factly. As he counted the money, I noticed his wristwatch for the first time. It was expensive, clearly custom-made. The logo engraved on its face made my stomach drop. It was the same emblem as First Trust Bank, the institution that had crushed my dreams twice. A well-dressed woman arrived one morning in a luxury sedan with engine trouble. She explained that she couldn't pay until her next paycheck in 3 days. My assistant, a teenager named Jerome, shook his head firmly. "No payment, no service," he insisted. But I saw the desperation in her eyes, the fear of losing her job without reliable transportation. I fixed her car anyway, waving away her promises to return. The next morning, I found an envelope tucked under my workshop door. Inside was the exact amount for the repair, plus an extra $20 for my kindness. No name, no note attached, just quiet honesty repaid in kind. These small moments of human decency kept me going when profit margins were razor-thin and success seemed impossibly distant. They reminded me why I'd started this journey. Weeks passed without any sign of the old man. I missed his strange questions and comfortable silences. The workshop felt emptier without his occasional visits. Then one morning, I arrived to find a handwritten note pinned to my workbench with a rusty nail. The paper was thick and expensive, the handwriting elegant and old-fashioned. "Some investments take time to mature," it read, nothing else. No signature, no explanation. I turned the paper over looking for more clues, but found only blank space. That same week, rumors started circulating through the neighborhood. People whispered about a mysterious retired banker who funded small businesses in secret. Nobody knew his name or how to contact him. The stories seemed too good to be true, like urban legends designed to give false hope. A few days later, a lawyer in a pressed grey suit appeared at my workshop entrance. He looked completely out of place among the grease stains and scattered tools. He handed me a heavy white envelope sealed with red wax. Inside was a simple note on cream-colored cardstock. Greenwood Building, Monday, 10 in the morning. That was all. I thought it was elaborate spam until I noticed the embossed logo in the corner. The same symbol from the old man's watch. The same emblem of First Trust Bank. My hands trembled as I held the paper. Jerome asked if I was okay, but I couldn't form words. Monday was 3 days away. I spent those days oscillating between hope and fear. What if this was some cruel joke? What if the bank was suing me for something I didn't understand? When Monday arrived, I dressed carefully in my only suit. The Greenwood Building stood downtown, all glass and polished marble. Security guards in crisp uniforms monitored the entrance. People in expensive suits hurried past carrying leather briefcases. I felt completely out of place, like a stray dog wandering into a palace. The receptionist smiled warmly when I gave my name. "Right this way, Mr. Kingsley," she said, gesturing toward the elevators. "He's been expecting you." Her words confused me. Who had been expecting me? The elevator rose smoothly to the top floor. My reflection in the polished doors showed a nervous man trying to look confident. The doors opened to reveal an office lined with oil portraits in gilded frames. Then my heart stopped completely. The old man's photograph hung prominently with a brass nameplate beneath it. A young executive in a tailored suit entered through a side door. His expression was somber but kind. "That man," he said, gesturing to the portrait, "Mr. Henry Colton, founded First Trust Bank 40 years ago." My knees nearly buckled. The man I'd shared cheap burgers with, who'd watched me work in awkward silence, wasn't just some random customer. He'd been the very foundation of the institution that had rejected my dreams twice. The executive continued speaking, but I barely heard him through the ringing in my ears. "Mr. Colton passed away 6 weeks ago." The words hit me like a truck. 6 weeks. He'd been gone for 6 weeks, and I'd never known. All those weeks wondering where he'd disappeared to, and he'd been dying, or already dead. The executive handed me a sealed envelope addressed to me in Henry's distinctive handwriting. My fingers shook so badly I could barely open it. The letter inside was written on the same expensive paper as the note on my workbench. "Kingsley," it began, "you once fixed my car in the rain, but you repaired something far greater that day. You restored my faith in people when I'd nearly lost it completely." Tears blurred my vision as I continued reading. "I've spent my career in banking, watching greed corrupt good intentions. The manager who rejected you twice represented everything wrong with what I built. You passed the only test that matters in this world, character." At the bottom were GPS coordinates and one final line. "Go there today, take these keys." 3 silver keys fell from the envelope into my palm. I followed the coordinates to an empty fenced lot in the commercial district. My heart pounded as I pulled up to the address. The location made my breath catch. This lot sat directly across the street from First Trust Bank. The very bank that had humiliated me stood right there, visible through the chain-link fence. Inside a weatherproof lockbox mounted on the fence, I found a property deed bearing my full name. The legal language was dense, but the meaning was clear. I owned this land. A construction crew worked nearby, and I approached them cautiously. They were hanging a massive sign above what looked like the frame of a new building. I stepped closer, squinting at the letters. "Kingsley Financial, opening soon." My legs gave out, and I sat down hard on the dusty ground. Later, I learned the full story from Henry's estate lawyer. Before his death, Henry Colton had created a foundation dedicated to supporting small entrepreneurs. My workshop had been his final experiment, a test of character and spirit. He'd watched me for months after that first rainy encounter. Every kind act, every honest transaction, every moment I chose integrity over profit. He documented it all in his leather notebook. The 3 keys represented 3 prime commercial locations he'd set aside specifically for me. Properties he'd purchased quietly over the previous year. He'd seen in me what the bank's manager never could. Potential measured not in credit scores or collateral, but in human decency. The foundation was prepared to fund my expansion completely. No loans, no interest, no strings attached beyond one requirement. That requirement came in another letter I found in the deed paperwork. "If kindness built your doors, make sure others can walk through them too." Henry wanted me to pay forward what he'd given me. to look for struggling entrepreneurs with character but no capital, to judge them by their hearts rather than their bank statements. The weight of his trust felt crushing and liberating simultaneously. I spent that night in my tiny apartment, staring at the 3 silver keys. They represented more than property. They symbolized a complete transformation of my life. From a man rejected and humiliated to someone trusted with carrying forward a legacy. I thought about all the times I'd wanted to give up, all the nights I'd questioned whether kindness was a weakness in a cruel world. Henry had answered that question permanently. Weeks flew by in a blur of construction and planning. The buildings rose from nothing with stunning speed. Henry's foundation had apparently prepared everything in advance, just waiting for the right moment to execute. Architects, contractors, designers, all already hired and briefed. My role was simply to guide the vision and ensure it matched my original dreams. I insisted on keeping elements from my old garage. The original workbench became the centerpiece of my personal office. The rusted tools I'd started with hung on the wall like precious artifacts. Several weeks before opening day, Mr. Preston walked through my front door. The same manager who'd rejected me twice now stood in my reception area, unaware he was standing in my building. He was there seeking a business partnership, pitching First Trust services to the new financial institution everyone was buzzing about. Recognition dawned slowly on Preston's face as I stepped out of my office. The color drained from his cheeks like water from a broken dam. His mouth opened and closed wordlessly. I let the silence stretch, watching him squirm. Finally, I smiled and gestured to a chair. "Dreams aren't hobbies anymore," I said quietly. To his credit, he didn't make excuses or try to justify his past behavior. He simply gathered his briefcase and left. I watched him cross the street to First Trust Bank, shoulders hunched in defeat. I felt no triumph, no vindictive pleasure, just a quiet sense of justice finally served. That evening, I received a call from First Trust's regional director. She apologized profusely for Preston's behavior and informed me he'd been terminated. I requested they reconsider. "Everyone deserves a second chance," I told her. Opening day arrived with perfect weather. The sun shone brilliantly on the gleaming glass and steel of Kingsley Financial. The street filled with neighbors, mechanics, small shop owners, all the people who'd supported me when I was working from a leaking shed. Jerome, my young assistant from the garage days, stood beside me in a new suit. I'd made him my first official employee and sent him to business school on the foundation's funding. As we prepared to cut the ribbon, I saw faces in the crowd that I'd helped over the years. The woman whose car I'd fixed without payment, Marcus, who'd warned me about trusting the old man, even some former First Trust customers who'd switched their accounts to support me. The ribbon fell, and applause erupted. My name glittered in gold letters above the entrance, visible from across the street. That evening, I sat alone in my new office after everyone left. An envelope had been delivered to my desk during the celebration. Inside was a note in Henry's unmistakable handwriting, clearly written before his death and held by his lawyer for this specific moment. "If you're reading this, you've succeeded beyond even my hopes. Remember that wealth is a tool, not a trophy. Use it to open doors for others the way I opened them for you. The world needs more people who fix things, even when they're not broken yet." I placed the letter in a frame beside my desk. Years later, I would read it every morning before starting work. It became my compass, my reminder of why success without character is just decorated failure. Henry's words guided every decision I made. 25 years passed. I walked down that same street on a gray autumn morning. The bank that once humiliated me now stood empty, foreclosure notices taped to its locked doors. First Trust had collapsed under the weight of bad loans and worse leadership. Across the road, my 3 branches stood tall and thriving. Kingsley Financial had become known for funding dreams that traditional banks ignored. A young man approached me on the sidewalk, clutching a worn folder against his chest. His eyes held the same desperate hope I'd carried years before. "Sir," he said quietly, "the bank turned me down." I smiled and gestured toward my building. "Then let's see what we can build instead." As evening fell, I placed fresh flowers beside Henry's memorial plaque in the lobby. The words came naturally, carved into my soul by experience. Rejection isn't punishment, it's redirection.